Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffiths. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffiths, and this podcast is ranked in the top 2% of the most popular podcasts in the world. And it's all because of my incredible guest. I am honored and blessed to share time with people who are at the top of their game, and they are here and willing to help you get to where you want to be in life and in business. And today our topic is the art of pricing, insights from Adam Wallace on revalue and business growth, and that's his book. I have it in front of me. Now, Adam Wallace is a leading expert in pricing strategies, and he's dedicated to unlocking pricing power for products and services. With over a decade of experience as a corporate fixer, he has worked with Fortune 100 leadership teams to enhance multi-billion-dollar ventures, helped organizations capture additional value, and optimize their pricing models. So currently, Adam serves as an interim executive and board member for private companies, applying his expertise to drive growth and profitability. And in his new book, which I just mentioned, Revalue, and re is in parentheses, revalue, raise your prices, and I'll get him to explain that. Raise your prices and build your legacy. Adam shares actionable strategies for businesses looking to enhance their pricing power. We all do. I'm doing it right now. He emphasizes that pricing isn't just about charging more, it's more about understanding the unique value customers are willing to pay for and what they really need, and identifying where businesses may be leaving money on the table. And this is fun information. Beyond his professional achievements, Adam grew up in a historic 2-story log cabin near Nashville, and it was built by his 7th-generation grandfather before Tennessee became a state. And that background instilled in him a strong sense of legacy and value, which he now shares his insights in the business world. Can't talk. Good morning, Adam. Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. It's good to have you here, and thank you for sharing your book with me.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here with your audience.
Start talking seriously. This book, when these books land on my doorstep, and they may land a month or two before we actually go live on the podcast, but I will look at it and go, okay, and I'll put some sticky notes in it, but I don't want to read it until the weekend before, because that way it's fresh. Then I go, leave an Amazon review. So I read it this weekend. It's got sticky notes all over. It's fat. It's getting fat. So anyway, tell our audience a bit about you and how you show up in the world.
Well, the first thing I'll probably have to explain as soon as I'm talking with that wonderful interview you did, and I do not sound Southern, that part of that corporate fixing for a decade was flying around the globe, spending a lot of time over in the UK and Australia and other places. So I believe my accent might be a little bit more of a mutt than what people would generally associate with that Nashville twang. But
I noticed that when we did the pre-interview, I kept thinking, where is he from? Because I would pick up just all kinds of accents melded into one, just little tiny bits. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I often joke that I must have watched too much of those British comedies on PBS growing up, because it started at a very young age. But home is always home, and I try to make it home to the log cabin at least once a year, where my parents still live to this day. So I would kind of maybe start with part of what I began seeing from large company side, that then I saw a disproportionate opportunity relative to regular small cap businesses on it. What I started seeing as I was going around, and corporate fixing is relatively simple. It's not as dramatic as you might think. It's simply somebody made a rather large investment. So usually they roll between 5 and 15, sometimes up to $45 billion. And then that investment wasn't turning out the way they were expecting it to. right? So even at those numbers, if you go over budget by 10%, well, somebody's having to write a check for about 3.5 billion. And so when that begins to be on that trajectory, they sort of like, okay, we've got to throw everything we have at it. And so usually you could imagine a spider web of phone calls going out. One of those phone calls would end up coming to me, and me and my team and a bunch of colleagues would jump in and start going in. And the thing that I begin to see over and over in each one of those situations, whether it was a large oil and gas capital project, whether it was a IT infrastructure project for what would be sort of the fifth largest bank, if it was a bank, or other options in fintechs, was kind of the same thing. Every single time there was sort of an economic driver for why you would say yes to sort of building a project or building an infrastructure or building a joint venture. And then those who would line up to deliver it would line up to deliver what they have been taught and were trained, rightfully so, what one of those things that they were building should look like. And in short-term things, that always was lined up very well. Everybody spent months and sometimes years aligning what the goals were. But as the rubber hit the road and those ventures had to kind of evolve over 4 or 5 years, often there became a disconnect. There became a disconnect between what those projects were really honed in to deliver and what the economic drivers were. And so the quick turnaround solutions, and sometimes they will between 3 and 9 months to produce and capture these billions of dollars of economic value, was simply by merging closing that disconnect, you might think, between what people who lined up to produce the value and where the actual economic value is coming from. Okay, interesting, but that's not very applicable to most people. But the interesting thing was I kept on getting pulled in by sort of friends and families. They didn't know what I did in the corporate world other than I did something and I advised these large companies and large executives. And they'd say, hey, come look at my company. Tell me what I should improve. And I was kind of shocked when I saw the same thing between really cool products and services that they built, but a similar sort of white space between what they optimized to delivering and then what was the true value that their customers were willing to pay more for. And often it was a little bit of a little change or sort of a 2% pivot that then, a year later, they would report to me, oh, yeah, I doubled my revenue. Or, oh, we went from a 15% EBITDA margin to a 30% EBITDA margin within 6 months. So at a certain point, I started just saying, well, give me a stake in that. I'll take a little risk reward. And after a few years, I realized I had an executive level salary just doing this off the side of my desk. So, as you said, I serve as an interim executive now. I only serve as an interim executive for companies I actually have a stake in. So I find companies that create disproportionate value and then go in and help them kind of optimize to it as part of an equity stake in the company for my little family office portfolio.
And I mentioned this it does make sense. At the very top, I asked you to explain revalue because it's not one word, it's re
Mm.
and then value. What does that mean?
Well, it's a bit of a nod to, I think most of the time when somebody builds a company, in order for that company to actually become a company, right, as opposed to just a singular product or like a lifestyle business, you find sort of a product market fit. So in the initial stages for any company to grow, like it's found something. What I tend to find is over time, it either doesn't optimize to what it finds, or, if you kind of think about it, like what you can control in your business is what you produced in your internal budget. What you can't control is what your customers actually value. Tastes change, what they pay for changes, and what you can't control is the environment that you have to conduct business in. So I find that those two things over time slowly change. And because they change kind of slowly, people don't necessarily see where that white space is between what they produce and the other one. So the revalue is a bit of, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to what people are actively willing to pay more for today and kind of revalue how we deliver it and who we speak to and hone our products to be able to capture more of that pricing power.
With everything is moving so quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, so quickly. my head spins most days. I'm watching something, it was perfectly fine and dandy yesterday. I'm like, what the heck just happened there? I don't think I'm alone in that. So when you're talking white space, I'm wondering if that white space is getting bigger and bigger because things are moving so rapidly, and maybe there's not great communication between all these teams and people who are, part of getting this out there.
That's right. And I think part of it too is I am part of the motivation of writing the book at this time was I'd kind of seen a drift for about 20 years in the market. So for the past kind of 20 years, there's been sort of a standard playbook for growing a business and creating value. And what usually happens at a certain point is you're able to identify a proven model. It keeps on returning, it's good ROI of implementing that model, so you don't question it. And so you just do it. And then after an extended period of time, like measured in 1 or 2 decades, people stop understanding the principles that had that model be attractive in the first place. So I think what we're going through is kind of a late stage of 20 years of the proven models that we've kind of taken for granted. We haven't looked behind the curtain, so to speak, or we haven't really distilled or had to spend much time focused on the core principles that had that be an attractive model for 20 years. But if you zoom out from 100-year cycle, it's like, oh yeah, that's just a small step within 100-year cycle. So I think also part of revaluing is recognizing kind of where we are. What I'm seeing in a lot of businesses right now is kind of the tales of two businesses, where businesses who have really focused on good products that people are wanting to buy, their equity valuations are up, they're booming. Businesses that had focused on sort of a good growth story or good growth narratives are getting punished because they're not delivering it. So also part of writing this book was a bit of an impetus to say, hey, even if you're no longer pursuing a growth story, there's probably something you're producing incredible value for your customers. And it's time to go back and start focusing on sort of the core business drivers of your business and get those right, because I think they're giving disproportionate returns right now than what we would usually be seeing. Than what we're seeing in a lot of businesses.
I have questions, but I'm
Mhm.
writing them down. I'll come back to that. I'm actually opening up page 21, and I was fascinated by this because it's called Navigating Pricing Riptides.
Mm.
I had never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, no, it was kind of interesting because while I've always enjoyed looking at the economics of a company because I always find, whatever gets presented, or some people kind of look at another company that they admire and they don't actually, because it's usually proprietary and it's trade secret or it's confidential, they don't actually get to look at just core budget underneath, or they don't see the numbers under the skirt, so to speak, of how that business actually operates. So I've always liked to go into businesses and take a look at how they're running everything. And sometimes people will just give me a look inside that for a quick cold eyes review. And often what I would find is relative to people's pricing, I would give them, oh, okay, yeah, no, here's a quick benchmark of what it is, and you need to be able to raise. And then I would see them struggle to be able to implement that for a reason, or they would be sort of fighting against something that it was kind of like, yeah, but that's the case always. That's just the nature of your business. You're always going to get pushback on that, but that doesn't mean that pushback doesn't translate to lost purchases. And there's kind of these different aspects of it. So I took the time to kind of write out 7 principles. And I called them pricing riptides because it's sort of like the riptide at the beach. The riptide kills more people than shark attacks every year. More people drown because they get caught in a riptide, not knowing, because the riptide is where the water washes up onto the beach and then it's got to go back out to the ocean. So basically, it's this river that's only about, 100 yards wide on a wide open beach. And to get out of the riptide, you just swim to the left or to the right. But if you don't know you're actually in one of these riptides, what will happen is you'll start trying to swim to shore and you're swimming in a river. It's just taking you farther and farther out. And then you wear yourself out. And unfortunately, a lot of people end up drowning because of this. But at the same time, on the same beach every day, the surfers go out to the break. They look for the riptide. They jump right into the riptide. They paddle out to get to the surf up lineup because it's kind of like a moving sidewalk at the airport. So it's kind of the analogy for there's certain things that kind of flow in a certain direction that you're always going to have to deal with. But if you know where they are and how they affect you, you can actually use them to your advantage. So a very simple example from a pricing riptide is you don't deliver equal value to all your customers. You know, there is a Pareto optimization for the value you give to your customers. So here's a very simple and kind of surprising example of that. My brother is an equine dentist down there in Texas. So dentists who, I mean, horses who have a dentist. Now, that's an unusual sort of obtuse crew. But it turns out back when the US had a cavalry, every seventh man was a farrier, and every 10th man, farrier being, horseshoes and taking care of the hooves, and every 10th man was a trained dentist. Because as horses grow up in the wild, they eat grass off the ground, their front teeth wear down, and then they chew them, and the molars wear down. But as soon as they're domesticated, their front teeth don't really wear down as fast because they're usually eating hay or oats in the stall. The back teeth wear down, and without the right sort of balancing and everything like that, then they can end up having problems. Well, he was progressing up in his career, and anybody can hire a veterinarian to float their horse's teeth, which is the regular teeth maintenance for a horse, and it costs $70. And so he was starting to become quite excellent. He became the president of the International Association and yada yada further in his career. But he kind of had this point where he was now being able to charge a premium because he could walk onto a show horse, a horse worth a couple $1,000,000, and look at it and turn to the trainer and say, "This horse cuts better to the right than to the left." And they're like, "Yeah, I've been trying to break them from doing this for years." It's like, no, 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 it's not you. Let me balance the mouth out. And it just happens with the way a horse is structured. If you're able to hone part of their teeth a certain way, they can move their neck a certain way, which means they can move their body a certain way. And he was able to handle these performance issues for a trainer disproportionate than what the trainer could spend hours and hours trying to overcome. So he started increasing his price to be able to capture that. At the same time, when he would do it for his wife's friends, all of a sudden they were complaining that he was giving them a family and friends discounts, but it was still more than the local service on it. But one of the issues is when he's doing it for a family or friend who just has their local riding horse or barrel racing horse for their daughter to race in, do they actually get more value out of his service than when he does it for a performance horse who has the opportunity, or the difference between winning first runner-up and grand champion is the difference between $5 million a stud fee for lifetime. Which one adds more value? And
They
so
both do, don't they? I mean, they're both getting value.
they're
They're
both getting
paying
value.
for a different level of value, but they're both getting value.
That's right. But it's exactly what you just said. They're both paying for a different level of value.
Right.
So the price for one person, he could double his prices because he's no longer just providing a simple service to keep the horse healthy. He's helping that trainer get to where the trainer wants to go. And that trainer is happily going to pay him 3 times as much versus it's a necessary maintenance. Both add value, but what they're willing to pay for is at 2 different levels.
It was a meme. I saw it the other day, and I've seen it before, and I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but basically, it goes along the lines of you're not paying me for 10 minutes. You're paying me or an hour. You're paying me for the years of experience that allowed me to do that work for 10 minutes or an hour. And I think a lot of people forget about that. They think you're just magic and you're going to fix it for them, and it was going to cost them $20. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's right. And I've seen that meme. It's kind of very popular, and I know a lot of people with advanced skill sets really love it. But I would even challenge them to go a bit farther. That person doesn't pay them for the 20 years you do. That person wants that 20 years of experience for what it's going to do for them, and that's what they're going to pay for. They're not going to pay for your 20 years of experience. But if your 20 years of experience gets them to where they want to be, they will pay for that.
Because, listen, I work very hard at what I do. You clearly do. I didn't just jump out of bed one day and say, oh, I'm going to be a web developer. Oh, I'm going to have a podcast. It's taken me years to get where I am. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of training, a lot of, oh, geez, what the heck did I do there? We don't just jump up and call ourselves something and bill you for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work, a
Yeah.
lot of training, a lot of crying that went behind those prices.
That's right. That's right. And I feel like this is often sort of a riptide that people do get caught in because they look at that amount of work and that amount of effort. And in one hand, they think it's worth way more than what people are willing to pay for. And in the other hand, they then go price themselves way lower than what the best customers will actually pay for. If instead of looking at the case from why am I worth that, looking from the case from the customers, what am I enabling my customer to get to that they value more by my service? And then do my initial price valuation based on answering that question as opposed to answering the question. And it's a necessary question. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is an either or. I'm saying it as an and. Yes, of course, cost plus. Let me take a look at my pricing based on that. Of course, expertise and let me benchmark my expertise in the industry. But where I feel like a lot of people leave unmonetized value is they don't benchmark it from what am I enabling for my best customers and what is that worth to them.
Ask you this, Adam. Where, if somebody, let's say a small entrepreneur who's been kind of doing, you hear this all the time. Well, it's always the way I've done it. I've always done it this way. Stop doing that. And I tell myself that I'll stop doing that. But we often, and I'll add myself in that mix, we often don't really know what our customers or our clients need until we do some in-depth conversation and digging with them.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, I think that's where a lot of people just kind of go, well, I don't have time to have these conversations. Are you
That's
kidding
right.
me? You are
Yep.
joking, right?
Hmm.
Unless you can define where their true pain points are and how you can be of assistance, I don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. No, no, that's it. That's exactly right. I would even go a step further and say that most people would be better off economically if they fired the bottom 20% of their clients. And then, like if it's a professional service firm or something like that, fire the bottom 20% of their clients and use that newly found time to find out that for the other 80%. It would grant you disproportionate returns.
And I know exactly what you're talking about. So we're still talking about values and customer perception.
Mm-hmm.
Have I missed anything? How do values influence the way customers perceive products and services?
Well, that is a very deep question. So we can kind of talk about it at different levels. But I would say sort of at the deepest level from a physiological point of view. And I got interested in this about 20 years ago because I was training graduate students and it was like an elite graduate school program where they searched the world for 40 students and everybody got tuition waiver and they all got trained together in a conservatory. And so they were the top of the top. So there was none of this sort of like, you couldn't say, when you had a performance issue, you couldn't say as a professor or as a trainer, oh, I just need a better student. It was like, sorry, they don't exist. But the issue we'd run into sometimes is like we could provide the best technical answer to the person on how to do what the challenge was that they had, but they would sort of ignore it or they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't, it was almost like they didn't see it. And so trying to sort of intervene in that, we started kind of diving into it. It's like, oh, isn't this very, very interesting? Because, there's a certain way of perceiving a challenge or an opportunity that experts the people who are training them, as well as, we were very well tied into industry experts, all saw it. So like they would walk in and they would look at a problem and they would immediately hone in on, okay, here's the X. Here's the years of experience that tells me if I do this activity, that will increase the outcome or solve the issue or capture the opportunity. However, simply telling somebody else, this is what you do, less than 20% of the time, the person would then go and do it. And so as we started diving into, okay, what's the nature of this problem, we started to kind of have to contend with how do people perceive the world. And what we have discovered relative to sort of the underpinning physiological aspect of that is people. So if you think of the nature of it, like humans have a very, very advanced cognition. Our brains weigh about two pounds, 2.5 pounds, so about 2% of our body's mass. Sorry, 2 kilos. 2% of our body's mass, yet at the same time take about 25% of our energy. And so infants have to be born about 3 months earlier compared to other mammals because the head size is too large, and if any more head size, they would actually be trapped inside and not be able to be born or having birthing problems. So there's this aspect of we've kind of how would I say, maxed out physical cognition. So we have to kind of optimize our intelligence by sort of a software optimization by selecting only a subset of the things in our environment that we are going to apply our computation to. So a lot of people just assume, or like I assumed when I started looking into this, that no, I see all of the visual input around me in the world. And then based on what I'm attending to, I place my attention to it. And it turns out I was completely wrong. It works the other way around. Based on what we're attending to, that is what we value. So think about the last time you deliberately chose to put your attention on something that would get you to a worse place in your life. Probably doesn't happen. Every time
Yeah.
you're looking, you're always looking from I'm where I am. I'm kind of projecting out based on my current trajectory of where I'm going and what's possible. And then I'm optimizing to get to some place I value more,
Yeah,
some
I'm
place I
writing
want to
out a
be.
list. That doesn't always work. So, yesterday was a good case in point. I walked around yesterday going, "You have got to be kidding me." It was just, but it was Sunday. I forgave myself.
But even with the contrast, even with something that shows up as an obstacle, it's only an obstacle in contrast to what you really care about and what you really value. So people's perceptions is often given to them by what they actually value out in the future that they're trying to get to, for what they're paying attention into the moment. And we call that relevance realization. But a simple example is this. Have you ever had the experience or had a friend have the experience where they're looking to go buy a new car, they finally figure out one that they think they like, and then all of a sudden everybody in your neighborhood started driving that car like overnight?
hmm When I bought my car, I thought, "Oh, I'm so special. I'm the only one that's got one," until I went to the Walmart parking lot. I was like, "Oh, never mind. I'm not all that special after all."
There you go. There you go. That's relevance realization in action. And I think a lot of times relative to people's products and services, they don't recognize how in that initial capture, like of a new client, how you have to speak to what they already value versus what you offer. And you have to align it to where they actually want to get, not what you're offering. And so you're asking about sort of values. It's not just a question of um, do I create value for people, but it's actually do I understand the value, the laddering of idiosyncratic values of my best customers, so I can speak to where they're trying to get, not my products or services.
We all, whatever business we're in, we all have our own bias.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times it still happens. I've been doing this for a long time. I'll have a consultation with a potential web client, and they'll give me this whole list of the things that they want, and they want it to look like this website or that website. And I listen, I record it, I take a lot of notes, and then I tell them to go back to the table. I really do. What I'll
Hmm.
do is I'll say, by the time we're done, they didn't need but a fraction of the things they just had to have. But
Mm.
I will say, listen, go back in your head, because we're all in our head, we think in
Hmm.
pictures. Walk into this website that you really want to be, you want it to be yours. Walk in the door. Tell me what you see. And they just
Mm.
go blank. They don't
Hmm.
know. They
Yeah,
don't know. They just want to copy somebody else because it's easy.
that's right. A lot of times I would say what they're espousing they want. And this is kind of a common trap relative to
Exactly.
optimizing to values, right?
Yep.
What they're espousing they want is a local instantiation of something that they're familiar with. So often what happens is the objects in our environment um, become sort of imbued with the values we care about, right? So, it's kind of interesting to a person who doesn't like high fashion and fine purses. Why would somebody spend $4,500 on a high-end purse? Yeah, for a person who does, of course they would buy that day in and day out, right? Like it's a bargain at twice the price sometimes. And so it's kind of these interesting things where it's not about the object, it's about the value that gets imbued on the object. And I think the example you gave is so wonderful because it happens in the reverse as well. You have to be very, very careful when you talk to your customers about it because they're not going to be able to tell you just rattle off the top of their brain what they value. What they're going to tell you is they're going to tell you a set of objects that in their current environment is currently imbued with the things they value. And so
Yes.
part of learning how to do that dance is learning that it is sort of a finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon itself. And so don't collapse with what they say as, oh, okay, if I just do that, then they'll buy it. They're probably your customers are probably the least reliable people to tell you what they value, but they will point you to it better than anybody else.
Because that was really important. So repeat that if you would.
Your customers, if you ask your customers what they value, they probably won't tell you anything of value to you, but they will point to an instantiation that they imbue what they really care about. And it's just part of the nature of being humans. We are not very
Right,
good
right.
at discerning what we really care about, but we're really good at knowing, hey, before when I had this thing, it came along with this thing that I valued a lot. So I ask for that thing every single time. I actually don't care about that instantiation, but I imbue that local instantiation with this larger meaning, with this larger thing that I care about. So it's exactly what you did. And it was a wonderful question of like, close your eyes and tell me what you see because it cuts through some of those instantiations. Now, also, I would suspect if I kind of asked you and we talked back and forth a while, you could probably come up with a top 10 list of local instantiations of what people say they want. And then in turn, okay, this is what that's actually meaning. So when you hear that, you know exactly how to kind of translate that common throwaway line into, oh, okay, this is what they're really going after when they say something like that.
People are not going to like this, but you have to learn to sit down and shut up and listen. So you can write that down. I listen very, very carefully. I take a lot of notes. I don't take a client at first glance. I
Mm,
need to figure out what it is that they really need. Can I actually help them? Can I get them to where they think they want to be?
mm, mhm,
And then, down the road, we'll figure out where they really do want to be.
mm,
And it's not unusual for me to say, listen, I'm not going to be able to help. I'm not your person, but let me recommend somebody to you
mm,
who
mhm.
can, help you with that. But just be careful what kind of work you take. If you are really not their person, don't do it. You're going to
That's
wind
right.
up, I know, and I tell people this all the time. They'll say, "Oh, I don't want to do social media. That's not as prevalent as it was." But
Mm,
oh, I don't need social media. And I said, "Listen, I can't build your website, but why? You're really good. I love your work." Because I will wind, if you're not going to drive traffic to it in one way or another, or several ways or another, I'm going to wind up building you a really pretty boat anchor. It's not going to do a darn
mm.
thing. Go back to your riptides. It's not going to do a darn thing. You're going to be mad. I'm going to look bad. And the answer is no, I can't help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I love it. I mean, part of knowing the value you really create is not doing business with people who you can't deliver that value for.
What it is that they're needing or wanting, I can try to help,
Hmm.
but just so much. Then I send them somewhere else.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. That's right. And they'll be better off for it. And then
Oh,
also
yeah.
by
Yeah.
distinguishing what you do, if they learn to value that in the future, you've already delivered something of value to them by making the connection earlier on. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to go through the book kind of chapter by chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you want to start? My next note was for leveraging novelty, but you tell me where you want to go with the
Oh,
book.
no, that's a great transition from relevance realization.
Oh, okay. So my notes tell me that novelty can be a powerful tool in product offerings, which we've kind of talked about.
Hmm.
So how can businesses leverage the uniqueness of their products to stand out in the market? And
Mm.
I'm not, I see some products, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Really? Okay, that's a novelty. I'm not buying it ever, but that's a novelty. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to say about novelty?
It seems to be an interesting hack, so to speak, and I mean the hack in both a negative connotation and a positive connotation. So here's what I mean by it. People often, I think, find themselves on the wrong side of the novelty factor, meaning they have built a innovative solution to a problem that they see their customers and the potential market has. And so that's really cool. That's what I look for, right? Like when if I'm taking a stake in a company, I'm looking for a novel solution or an innovative solution to a problem that people have. But the issue is people won't recognize it. Because they don't know it. They've never seen it before. So it's important to realize in order for somebody to see something as novel, they have to first recognize it and put it in a category of things that already exist. Yet it occurs to them as like an 80-20 kind of role. Well, like it's 80% of what I recognize in this category, but all the other things in this category doesn't have this or doesn't have that. And that's the other 20%. But I often find that entrepreneurs and business owners who have created something innovative try to sort of resist that category. That any sort of pedestrian would have a quick little heuristic of like, oh yeah, so you make one of those, as opposed to embracing it. Yes, I make one of those, except this. Oh, I've never seen that before. And what you're looking for, and it's kind of this is a bit of the other side of the hack, the beneficial side, is people who take time to explore something as an option, a strategy, a new product, a service, whatever the case is, the more time they take to become familiar with it, the more they'll end up valuing it. So by sort of telling somebody one of their first impressions, no, this isn't what you think it is, you create cognitive dissonance in their brain and you force them onto a value judgment. Oh, okay. And you often hear that with people that say like, oh, I'm sure that's good for somebody, but it's just not for me. Versus, oh, I know what that is, but that's different. And let me look at it to understand how it's different. Now, in hindsight, 2 or 3 years down the road, you might very well create your own category. But categories are created in hindsight, not foresight. It's sort of embracing that to be novel. You have to allow somebody to put you in a bucket. And then when you're in that bucket, allow them to see how you're different so that they will explore that in more detail.
You can share?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you have an example you can share?
Yes. Let me think of a good one that I can share on it.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, there's certain
Well,
ones
I
I can
kind of
share, and there's
did.
certain ones I can't share. So I'm trying to go through the list
Okay.
to find a good one that I can share. Um, but actually, yeah. So I'm going to share it as a category because I have multiple different companies and stuff like that that have it as a category. But I would say often consulting services very much fall in that bucket where consulting, like everybody, like it's such a broad name. So let's say if you're in leadership consulting, you can say, oh, okay, I'm in leadership consulting, and the person immediately applies you to the last leadership consultant that they had in-house. That's okay.
A lot
And
of
it
people are
gets off.
confused about, consulting and coaching. That's a whole nother discussion.
Exactly, but essentially what it is they're going to put you in the bucket of the people who have done that for them. Now, if you're in that industry, there's 100, maybe even 1,000 now different variations in that industry. And so I've seen it so many times where the person's using basically, if you think about it, from all of the seconds of their elevator pitch to educate the person who casually asked about it in all of the different verticals and things so that they can successfully identify the type of consulting they do versus just accepting that that person has the experience. Whatever doesn't match, say, oh, yeah, except this is how we go about it. And matching the this is how we go about it to something they already care about, for which they would then ask the second question. So again, it's kind of like one of these things of trying to correctly have the person understand your product or service versus you using the opportunity to correctly shine a light on what the person cares about that has them talking to you in the first place.
A long-winded conversation, you can be pretty precise with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I
right.
think
And
that's where some people just go, well, let me tell you. No, no, stop. You've already told me plenty. Now let me ask a question.
exactly. And oh, that's a great call out. When a person asks a question, what is motivating the question?
So how do you know what? Now I have to think. Um, keep going. I'm going to keep thinking.
Mhm. Yeah, so when a person asks a question, what are they beginning to tilt their hand to? When was the last time you asked questions about things you didn't care about? In World War II,
Oh,
it was always the gold standard of espionage, right? So,
right.
like in espionage, you want to know certain questions about the enemy. But in counter espionage, the most valuable thing was always to get a list of questions your enemy wanted to know about you, because you're not going to ask a question about to an answer you already know, right? So then you can actually discover what in counterespionage, what your enemy knows and what they don't know. So if they're asking you about the payload of certain missiles, then you can take for granted they actually know you have the missiles. If they're asking you how many missiles you have, then they don't know you have the missiles, right? So the gold standard was never the answer to the question. The gold standard was to be able to capture the unadulterated list of questions that the other side wanted to know. So when a person asks you a question, that gives you far more insight into what they value than almost any answer to a question you can ask.
Brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. And I think I knew it at some level. I had just never heard it put into plain English
Hmm.
or written it down. But I mean, when you said that, I went, yeah, I get that. But I had never articulated it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And it can sometimes be shockingly how simple their questions are to an expert like you. So there's also a little humbling too sometimes of when you realize what they care about and how easy it is for you to deliver on that.
Well, and I think all of us who are in business, entrepreneurs, whatever business we're in, we are often so good at what we do that we just think everybody knows how to do it. And we don't think it's all that special, but it
That's right.
is. It
Yeah,
really
exactly.
is. And I think we lose sight of that. And that's where we come up with pricing issues because it's
Mm-hmm.
easy for us. Oh, I can do that in 10 minutes. A lot of times I can. Should I? No.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to train myself to not just jump in, fix it, and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm-mm. Okay, so next up, my next question was espoused versus embodied values.
Mm.
Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. What's the difference between the two?
So, in a certain sense, a spouse is obviously anything I say. So if I might say I like really nice things, and then we all know sort of Maslow's hierarchy of need. If I haven't had food or shelter, I'm not going to complain about eating off dirty china, right? Right? Like it's just sort of a thing of espoused is what I say, and embodied is actually what I do. And it's well appreciated there's a disconnect between that, but it's kind of an interesting thing because what we often find is and I'll give you a concrete example of it. Let's say we can get a very not a complete agreement but a pretty solid loose consensus that valuing family is more important than valuing career, right? And we can also kind of within a group of test cases where we can all kind of agree on different people saying, oh, yeah, I value family more than career. If you had to miss your son's regular season game to achieve a decade-long goal of selling your company, yeah, that kind of sounds right. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you were to miss your daughter's wedding to join a monthly work meeting, everybody be questioning your values,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Right?
you'd be
Like,
divorced if you weren't already.
exactly. But even though we can agree that family is more important than career, there is going to be sort of an interesting toss-up between your son's regular season game and a monthly work meeting. And we're going to see different people choose to put one of those values above the other one in situ to the current circumstance and make a different decision. And that's what we mean by embodied values. It's not that that person who chooses to attend the work meeting doesn't value his family more. No, they value them and they value them equally, but in situ to actual day-to-day life, we can't act on all the things that we care about at the same time. We can't pursue it. So we have to sort of prioritize what we value in that moment, and we do so in a laddered fashion. So embodied, we're constantly making trade-off decisions based on what are we going to go after in that moment. And that's what I mean by embodied. So when we're looking to optimize pricing power, we're always looking for those embodied values. Or sort of another way I could say this is like, if I want to know what you value, give me your checkbook and your calendar. Because if you're spending your time and money on it, I can tell you probably better than you can tell me what you value. Because the second you start to tell me, you're also starting to negotiate your identity. You're starting to kind of negotiate your the way you view yourself. There becomes a lot of other things that get associated with it, as opposed to the core things that will be correlated to pricing power, which is simply what am I willing to pursue above something else in order to achieve it.
We're saying that I scribble a lot while I'm talking with people on the podcast. And I wrote down people are looking at you, they're watching you. So you can espouse one thing, but
Mhm.
if you do, let's talk, politics is a good one. I don't ever listen to what they say, ever, ever. Never have, never will, but I'll watch them.
Yeah,
There's a big difference there.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. And even like it's almost innately far more persuasive, right? So it's well appreciated in the human mind that a lot we make the decision first and then we rationalize it second. So that also kind of plays into this. Will based on our embodied values, man, that's always consistent with our behaviors. And when we see somebody embody something that we value, that we admire, it reorientates us to it. And it's very interesting how it grabs our attention and it causes us to attend to it in a different way. Whereas it's so easy, especially nowadays, you're talking about sort of the shift to kind of ignore because we've kind of like devalued the currency of talking about values. When you go into, like, I go into a different company and what they say they value, I can't tell the difference between a coal mine and an Ivy League college.
Right. And
Uh,
their culture is telling you everything you need to know.
exactly. I care about that. I care about how they're making decisions. What are their embodied values? What they're saying, secondary. It's important to tend to do. And the other thing, by the way, your customers, what they say about you is great. Like testimonials, you're talking about building websites. You can build a social norm off of what people say. So don't hear anything I say about it, poo-pooing it. No, there's a lot of great things you can do with it. Just don't take that as a proxy for how much you can charge. You have to look through that to the values they actually embody in their day-to-day decision making.
Oh, keep going. Now you've got well, you've always had my attention, but now I just sat up straight.
In which way? Yeah.
Well, and I get terrific reviews on this podcast. I mean, they're all
Mm-hmm.
5-star. They're for people like you that I get to meet and chat with, and I would never meet you in the local parking lot of my Walmart. It just wouldn't happen. But I get to meet people from all over the world, and I get to read your books, and I consider most of my guests in many, many ways to be my mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I've got hundreds of books in this room, and they all came from people like you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. But when I start to really go back and read and look and watch who you are, if you're not the person that I met on this podcast, it'll hurt my
Mm-hmm.
feelings. It really
Mm-hmm.
will. After a
Mm-hmm.
while, I'm like, well, darn it. But it
Oh, yeah.
it doesn't happen often. I'm not snookered often, really,
Mm-hmm.
because you guys show up here and you are the essence of embodied values. So thank you. I'm glad you
Mm.
made that point.
Oh, yeah. No. Thank you. I understand what you're seeing though, because I think it is. And you also got to bring up a next adjacent point on it with the, if it's not what you thought it was, people's reaction to it is insanely negative. And you see this with like Yelp reviews and other things. Well, it's like 10 bad customer interactions can ruin your business, while 100 normal ones is not going to save it. Right. And we see the same thing relative to pricing too. Like if you raise your price to signal to people, I'm selling a premium product, you can actually sell more products that way. It's very interesting because a lot of people think supply and demand as being sort of linear, but sometimes it can almost be pregnant, where as you raise your price, you can sell more. So what's a simple example of this? Pelotons did not sell many Pelotons at $1,100 a unit. They took off in sales when they started raising the price to $2,000 a unit. Why? Because at $1,100 a unit, it kind of looked cheap, meaning like one central line, it
Yeah.
looked like it was kind of valued engineered. You put a
It's perceived
$2,000.
value. Honestly,
Yeah.
I've done this. Years ago, I used to be a jeweler for a long time,
Mm,
and there's a lot of markup in jewelry, a
mm,
lot.
mm,
But if something sat in my case too long, I would just double it, and all of a sudden, like, ooh, can I see that? Yep, you sure can. Perceived value. If it looked too cheap, it didn't matter if it was a runaway bargain or it was the right price it should have been to start with. They wanted to be able to say, oh, it's worth that. I want it.
that's right. That's right. And the caution that comes with it is back to your point. If all of a sudden they walk out and then the stone falls out in a week, they're furious. So the backlash for any misstep when it's priced more at a premium becomes way louder, because you feel exactly as you just said with people, between what they embody versus not, you feel like you got tricked. You paid the premium pricing, you didn't get the premium service. So I love obviously pricing power and moving up market, but it's also one of those ones from an operations point of view, you have to make sure your whole customer life cycle is backs up that premium price, because you're not going to charge a premium on one end and then do an automated chatbot for customer service on the other end.
Writing, I'm writing a lengthy blog about 3 different And you can almost see me use the quote marks, the little quotes around customer service experiences a week ago, 3 of them.
Mm,
And we went from 1, I hate you, I really, really hate you. 2, I don't hate you as bad, but you're still Dell, so I didn't expect much anyway.
mm,
And then
mhm,
1, it's like, okay, now you got me.
mm,
I will stick with you. You're good. I'm going to do what I can to get the word out. You're right. I mean, perceived value is nothing until you really give somebody a scrunching.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
customer service is not your friend. And you said it, if it's bots, if they can't reach you, if you don't answer the phone, why are you in business?
That's right. That's right. And there's sometimes these sort of almost like little compacts that we make, like I'll go to my local coffee shop and pay more, but I kind of expect because it's like the local one, I expect a certain nod. I expect something different than if I'm going to scale, right? Another sort of connection. And so like there's plenty of those sort of like embedded expectations that happen as people offer something. So I think the other main takeaway, and I kind of try to articulate in the book, is you have to pay attention to that whole life cycle of value generation. You can't just raise your price and not make sure the way you go about delivering it fulfills on it in a coherent way. Or if you're going, it's called the Costco effect, right? You're going to move a disproportionate amount of inventory because you're signaling, oh, that's a good deal. Well, okay, you're playing a different game too, and you have to make sure you've optimized your operations to deliver on that value. But no matter which way you go, it's all like the tip of the spear is the value people will pay for, and then revaluing your business in order to deliver that in the best way possible.
We are running out of time, but I want to ask you, time as a pricing variable. And,
Mm-hmm.
time can be a crucial factor in pricing. And how do we, small businesses, big businesses, how do we optimize time as a variable?
Yeah, great question. I think it's probably the most overlooked variable. Very simply put, people will pay more for a solution to solve a problem when they're on the 5 yard line of getting where they want to get to, and they have the problem, than they will pay when they're on the 50 yard line uh, to try to get to the same end zone, the same goal, same motivating destination. Which is interesting. It's like, wait a second. I'm willing to pay more simply because I'm at the proximity of a certain goal. And it's like, well, yeah, you kind of think about it sometimes. Where will, you're yeah, whatever it is, like you're pulling a lot of vendors and stuff together, and there's one you don't particularly like, but you're almost to the finish line of where you want. So it's like, okay, yeah, sign that. Just get it. Of course, I want that. Or if you're trying to close a deal where you're about to make $10 million, of course I'm going to pay $1 million to overcome the obstacle of getting the deal signed. But, a year from now, okay, I've had the experience with that obstacle. Am I going to proactively pay $1 million to prevent it? No. I'm probably not even going to pay $100,000 to proactively prevent it. So I think one of the criticalities is as you map what people value and where they're trying to get to, just appreciating the time dimension. Where in the introduction is it? If I'm trying to sell prevention, I'm being I'm being valued at a magnitude less than if I'm selling the solution. Okay, that's interesting. The other thing in time is if you're selling something that's going to be like a longer term relationship that's going to be reoccurring, often people want an initial thing they can buy from you just to test out your services and just to test out the working relationship. And so often I see people try to reduce the price of that or reduce their margin on that even worse, as opposed to, no, no, just appreciate this sale isn't just happening for the first sale, but I can lay out my customer journey in time. And when I lay out my customer journey in time, I can identify, no, 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 they need a test case. They need a demonstration of me. And so instead of reducing my margin, maybe I can reduce the duration. I can give them an easy to say yes to upfront piece that will then, once they have that confidence, will then actually unlock the larger sale of my core offering. and be able to kind of identify it that way. So I think time is just a underattended variable that really does affect a lot of what people are paying for. So the more you can really begin to see where does your product and offering lay in the in your buyer's time scale, and then where you can lay out your buyer's journey in time, you can find a lot of that white space that we started talking about at the very beginning.
Okay, one more question.
Mhm.
I've got many of them, but I think we can work this one in. Gatekeepers.
Yes.
What are gatekeepers in pricing strategies?
Gatekeepers is an expression that comes from the 4x4 overlanding community. So this is it was very big in Australia and other countries where you just basically it's like hiking and camping, except you're in an all-wheel drive vehicle and you're going over the mountain roads and they're really trails. And then you camp and it's a multi-day sort of off-road adventure. Um, they have things at the beginning of the trails called gatekeepers. And essentially all they are is it's a similar size obstacle that will be farther down the trail. And they would normally just be able to like bulldoze it over. They do trail maintenance periodically. You could fill in the obstacle and not have it be there. But no, it's kind of the community says, no, anything that you're going to experience on this trail, we want to make sure we have an example of it right up front. So if this makes you nervous, trust me, you don't want to drive this trail, right? If you don't have the car or the experience, you don't want to go past this quote unquote gatekeeper. And so in that initial offering, I often think about in creating, and it even sounds like you do this when you are qualifying your customers. If they're not willing to pay for this initial offering at this initial price, they're not going to like what I have to offer down the road. So in a lot of people, unfortunately, borrow a strategy from large corporations about like the loss leaders. You sell the printer for $100 and then you charge $40 for the ink cartridges
Right, right.
on every 6 months. And I'm not saying that those things aren't wrong, but so many times I see service firms adopt that kind of loss lead or strategy of saying, no, I want to get the new customer as a client. So I'm willing to lower my margins. I'm willing to over deliver the account. I'm willing to do anything to get them in. And then it turns out you have a bad client. You have a client that doesn't actually value what you offer. And so I think a lot of times people overestimate the amount of, especially in service firms, the amount of energy it takes to go forward with the wrong client, as opposed to not booking the revenue of the client at all. So part of optimizing your pricing is building in that initial easy to say yes to, but appropriate margin pricing that really demonstrates, look, if you don't like this price, you're not going to like anything else I have to offer down the road. If you like this offer, then okay, let's get to know
Right.
each other better. Let's
Exactly.
test this out and be on a mutually beneficial journey.
And you said something so important because we all, it's just kind of our go-to thing. We over deliver. That's a big
Mm,
mistake. It took me
mm,
the longest kind of time because, like you say, you get a bad client or you have somebody says, well, yeah, but you did this. Why can't, what? Why do I have to pay for this stuff now?
that's right.
So don't over deliver. Do your absolute best, but deliver what you promised.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, for like the companies in my portfolio, that can be hard on the transition if you've never done it before. But even one of the baby steps, like if you're trying to cultivate a new habit in your company, okay, do a no fee change order. Say how much that was going to cost. Here's the price for it. I'm going to
Mm,
include it because it feels right, right? Because you haven't gotten to the place where you're willing to say, no, I'm not going to do it. But at least what you're saying is you're putting the price associated with it. And then you're making sure the other person proactively agrees to it up front. And you're not just making the assumption on your half that the person actually even cares about this anyways.
great advice. Adam, I can't believe we're out of time. I told you this is the quickest hour on the internet. But thank you so much for sharing your inspiring journey and your insights with us today. But before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? Excuse me. And where can people connect with you? Where can they find the book?
Go in reverse order. The book you can find on Amazon. Just revalue, and it'll come right up. It's been the number one new release for a few weeks now, so it's doing quite well. To connect with me, you can go to the website. It's adamwallace.com, and it'll have all the links and connections and everything in contact form on that as well. And then I would just say sort of what motivated writing this book to begin with was as I started building, my portfolio of companies, it was, I wanted to write out the principles that seemed to be working that would really allow people to be able to create and capture more of the value that they have to offer in the world, as opposed to getting stuck in these eddies and riptides. So any time I can help somebody do that, that's well worth it, and that's very valuable to me. So thank you for having me on today.
My pleasure. And the book is phenomenal. Listen, to our audience, in today's episode, we had the pleasure of speaking with Adam Wallace, the American Adam Wallace. And if you look him up, you'll find out what I'm talking about. There's him and an Australian guy. He's not the Australian guy. But Adam is a pricing strategy expert and author of Revalue, Raise Your Prices and Build Your Legacy. I love that title. And he shared valuable insights on navigating the complexities of pricing, including how to identify what customers truly value. That's so important. And the importance of leveraging novelty in product offerings. And we explored the difference in between espoused and embodied values and how these concepts can impact a business's pricing strategy. I would have never thought of that. And Adam also discussed the role of gatekeepers in pricing and the significance of time. Y'all, when you listen back to this, write all this stuff down. It's important. More importantly, I think, though, is go get the book. And he's talking about the significance of time as a variable in optimizing pricing strategies. So as we wrap up, remember that pricing is not just about charging more. It's about understanding the unique value you provide to your customers, and they need to understand it as well. So if you found this conversation insightful, please share it with your network and subscribe to our podcast for more engaging discussions. And thank you for listening, and I will see you next week. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffiths at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.